Hello, I'm Mike Hollow. I write the Blitz Detective stories, and I'd like to welcome you to this launch of the latest book in the series. It's called The Dockland Murder. It's published today, the 18th of March 2021, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. Now, normally when I've got a new book out, we'd have a special launch event in a nice bookshop. But of course, they're all closed at the moment. So I thought I'd try and do something as close as possible to that, but online, which means for this one we can all get together no matter where in the world we live. So it's great to have you here. I must say, one of the things I enjoy most about a real life launch is just taking questions from anyone there who wants to ask something and doing my best to answer them. So for this one, I've asked readers to email their questions to me, and I'll be answering some of those in a moment. So, The Dockland Murder. You may already be aware that the first 4 books in the series were republished last year in revised editions with new titles and new covers by my new publisher Allison and Busby. The Dockland Murder now continues the series as Blitz Detective story number 5, and it's a challenging new case for Detective Inspector Jago of London's Metropolitan Police. It's 1940, and day after day, night after night, air raids are pouring death and destruction down onto the streets below. It was a time when there was a lot of bravery, a lot of endurance, but the blackout at night was also the perfect cover for crime, even for murder. This story starts in the night in the Royal Docks. These were 3 big docks on the Thames to the east of London. If you fly in or out of London's city airport today, you'll know the place. The runway's built on a narrow strip of land between 2 of those docks, and that's where the warehouses and sheds used to be. It gives me a strange feeling to stand there nowadays and imagine all the noise and bustle there would have been, with all the ships and the dockers hauling cargoes on and off them, and to think that now it's all just ghosts and memories. I'd like to take you back now to 1940 to give you a flavour of the time, the place and the book, so I'll read you a bit of it. The skeletal silhouettes of cranes stood watch over the Royal Albert Dock in the scant moonlight, like mourners round a grave, as a solitary man paced slowly along the South Quay. Sharp gusts of wind blowing in off the Thames scoured his face, and the cold was like death in his bones, gnawing from the inside. He stamped his boots on the concrete, but it made no difference. It was always the same on nights. As the shift wore on, your body slowed down, and the chill set in. No wonder they called it the dead of night. He looked back to where spikes of orange flame leapt from the far end of the neighbouring Royal Victoria dock. The bombers had hit something, but he couldn't see what. One of the transit sheds or warehouses that lined the quayside perhaps, or maybe even a ship. Tonight, for once, on his own beat, things hadn't been so bad. As far as he could tell, the planes had missed the Royal Albert. But behind him, beyond the dark, hulking buildings on the quay, the sky was bright with the glow of more fire. He couldn't see what was burning, but there was nothing between here and the river except the King George V docks and the tightly packed streets of North Woolwich and Silvertown, where his own home was. Ever since the area had been pounded on the first night of the Blitz, he'd been thankful he didn't have a family. He walked on, listening to his own footsteps. The luminous hands on his wristwatch told him it was 5:20. Still a couple of hours to go before the blackout ended, but only another 40 minutes to work on his shift, if he got off on time. The noise of the men fighting the fires was too far away to be more than a faint backdrop, and the aircraft had gone. Where he was, all he could hear was the rats scurrying towards the sheds as he approached, and the lap of inky black water beside him. In normal times, that was the way he liked it on the night shift, quiet. But these were not normal times. It feels to me like something unpleasant might spoil that quiet shift, and I think it might involve a body. In this story, Jago has to contend with dock workers, home guard volunteers, pilfering and worse, as he pursues his investigation to snare the elusive killer. Now, I said I'd have some questions and answers, so I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone who's sent in a question. There isn't time to answer all of them, but I've picked out a few. To start with, here's one from Roger Gardiner. He says, what research have you done to recreate the pre-Blitz geography of the area? And one from Martin, who asks, in view of the fact that it's now 80 years since the Blitz, how do you go about researching for your books? Well, this sort of thing is very important for anyone writing fiction set in the past. If you get it wrong, it's like watching Miss Marple and seeing a satellite dish on a house in the background. For me, that just breaks the spell. So I like to walk around my locations, see what's left from those old days, look at old photos, talk to people who remember. And it's not just about geography, of course. Something else I think you have to get right is the way people spoke and thought back then. So I read memoirs, newspapers, even fiction written at the time, so I can build a realistic picture of what was going on in my characters' lives. Here's a question from David from Marlborough. He says, did you see Lucy Worsley's TV programme Blitz Spirit? What would Jago have thought of that? Well, yes, I did actually, David. And I think Inspector Jago would have recognised it as a pretty balanced account of the way things really were, because it used eyewitness accounts from the time. One of the people dramatised in the programme was an air raid warden called Barbara Nixon, and she wrote a very good book about her experiences that I read as part of my own research when I started writing the Blitz Detective stories. I think Jago would know that ordinary men and women were showing amazing resilience under the bombing, but I'm sure he also knew people could go to pieces. The papers and newsreels at the time liked to have pictures of cheery cockneys giving a thumbs up and a big grin as they climbed out of their backyard air raid shelters. But I'm sure Jago would have suspected those pictures might have been posed for the camera. Steve from Lymington asked this. He says, policing must have been different in wartime because of the extra rules and regulations brought in. The laws on murder probably didn't change much, but do you use the wartime laws in your storylines? The answer is yes, I do. So obviously I have to make sure I know what was against the law at that time and what wasn't, especially because of those extra regulations, as you say. To give you an example, in 1940, if you walked past a shop that had been bombed and you pinched a bottle of brandy that was lying in the ruins, according to the emergency regulations, you could be sentenced to death or to penal servitude for life. Scary, isn't it? I don't think anyone actually was, but some people did get 6 months in jail for doing that kind of thing. You could also be prosecuted for flying a kite, but I haven't used that in the book yet. Here's one from Simon Williams. He says, in previous books, Detective Inspector Jago has privately wanted to develop his relationship with the American journalist Dorothy. Without giving away too many spoilers, does he make any progress in this latest book? That's a difficult one to answer, Simon. I think you're right. He does seem to have grown rather fond of her since she turned up in his life. But where this relationship's heading, I'm really not sure. Jago's not the kind of man who wears his heart on his sleeve, so it's difficult to tell. All I can say is I hope no one gets hurt. And a final one from Mike Pierce. Does Mrs. Hollow ever worry that you might wish to test one of your theoretical methods of murder on her to see if it would work in practice? Mike, it is her constant dread. Well, that's all the questions we have time for, so all that remains is for me to say You can buy the Dockland Murder from all the usual places online, from your local bookshop or from the publisher. It's also available as an e-book. A paperback will be out in September and an audio book will follow later. You can find out more about the Blitz Detective books on the Allison and Busby website and on the Blitz Detective website. Or why not follow me on social media? Thank you very much for coming along, and I hope you'll enjoy the new book. Goodbye.